So how did I get into improv? So I was actually just taking a day off of work. I wanted to have just a mental health day, clear my head a little bit, and I was looking for something to do, and I found an improv class, and I walked in there, and I've done improv, but I had never done it in a class, like a proper setting, and it was wild. I mean, I couldn't believe how free people were. I couldn't believe how expressive people were and comfortable. And then as a perfectionist, I couldn't believe how comfortable everybody was with making mistakes and just rolling with it and forgetting about it. I mean, I used to obsess about mistakes that I made when I was performing on stage or something like that. And I knew every single mistake. It was like I almost kept a journal of every mistake prior to doing improv. And then I walk into this class and everybody's just like screwing up the scenes all over the place, but everyone's having fun at the same time. It was a paradigm shift for me. It just kind of like Jerry Seinfeld says about when he was a kid and they invented the Pop-Tart, that back of my head came right off. Right? That was what it was like when I came into improv. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't really think to use it therapeutically, although I was kind of like doing role plays and psychodrama, which was always something that made sense to me, but I didn't think I would do it like full on in therapy. I did improv for a few months without really actually telling almost anyone, because it just felt like this is something which makes sense to me, which might not make sense to other people, and that's okay, but I don't need to try to explain it to them because this is hitting me in a real place that I really need. Once I started telling people that I was doing improv, I started bringing it to my therapy. And the reason why I thought, bringing it to therapy was because there was a certain freedom that existed in improv, which I had never really seen before in therapeutic context either. So meaning that in improv, every time you start a scene, you and if it's one other scene partner, walk out on stage or in front of a class and you're screwed. For all intents and purposes, you're screwed because your task is to make up a story with no information other than one suggestion from the audience, right? Like cranberry, make up go. You and this other person have this problem that you need to solve. And what I learned from improv is that you have you rely on each other and you trust each other and respect each other. That's the only way to create a scene in improv. Meaning if you are rejecting the other person's reality, then it's not going to work. So if somebody says, hey, I bought you a garbage can for your anniversary and hands you a garbage can, right? So the number one rule of improv is you got to accept that reality. It's a garbage can, right? And you can't say, that's not a garbage can, that's a tire. The number one rule of improv is respect each other. You start to realize, listen, me and you are out here alone and we are in trouble. If we don't have each other, we have absolutely nothing. It starts to teach you to really appreciate the other people in your life. It starts to teach you that you can be the best at something, but doing it alone is almost never good. It almost never works. And especially if the other person is there to contribute and you are not including them, so then your best is actually terrible right now. So it'd be like the best improviser in the world doing a scene with somebody who's never done improv before and being like, don't speak, I got this, right? That wouldn't work. I started to think about improv in terms of intimacy, because intimacy, real intimacy is not one up, one down, or it's not who's better at things. Real intimacy is me and you together create something that is a third entity, which is special and meaningful, and I can't do it without you and you can't do it without me. And a lot of people struggle with that concept. I think especially in today's world where a lot of what we experience is tailor-made to the way we want it, and if we don't get it that way, then we'll go somewhere else. You don't like the way Starbucks makes your drinks, so you go to Dunkin' Donuts. You don't like Dunkin' Donuts, so then you go to Pete's. You go to a different coffee shop. And I think a lot of people struggle with relationships now because they're basically like, either you do what I want you to do, or I'm gonna go somewhere else. We don't live in small towns where there's 3 people to choose from, and if you don't choose this one, you probably don't have many other options. And so a lot of people are struggling with having intimate relationships and prioritizing relationships and viewing it from that lens, the lens of me plus you equals something brand new. Improv immediately forces you to do that. And so I started thinking, hey, maybe I can bring this to therapy. Maybe I could use it in therapy. So then I started using improv for anxiety. What I ended up also finding is that improv has a way of cutting through anxiety like a lot of other interventions can't. We talk about exposure therapy, right? And exposure therapy is great. It makes a lot of sense if there's a perceived fear, which is not really a perceived threat, which is not really that high level of a threat. So then we can incrementally bring you closer to that fear, and then you can learn that there's nothing really to be afraid of. Exposure therapy is something that's very helpful to a lot of people. Now, what improv did, though, is it was like a flooding version of exposure therapy with a immediate recovery. And so what I mean by that is flooding as a therapeutic tool is where someone's afraid of a pool and they go all the way, jump into the deep end and kind of like flood themselves with the anxiety, and then that, according to that philosophy, that would be a way of challenging the anxiety. Most people believe that flooding isn't effective because your anxiety spikes so hard so fast that you end up actually retreating further away from the anxiety stimulus, because you're saying that caused this really, really horrible feeling, so I don't want to do that ever again. With improv, so you're in the middle of this scene and one person says to the other person, I love working at the firehouse. And you could that person could normally get stuck on, what should I say? I'm not sure. Everyone's looking at me. I'm really anxious. But you have a moment there where like somebody, your scene partner, who is screwed, just like you are, is looking at you and saying like, add something, just add anything. And so then you blurt something out and you go, my favorite thing about working at the firehouse is the poles, right? That moment challenges your anxiety in a way that a lot of other situations don't. And the immediate recovery that I was referring to is the fact that you create something and it works, because then your scene partner goes, I love the poles. That's literally the only reason why I became a firefighter. So then you get this immediate sense of, hey, I did something spontaneously, I didn't overthink it, and it was good and it worked. And then you repeat that a bunch of times and you can start to feel a sense of comfort being performing in front of other people, socializing, public speaking, all that kind of stuff, because you start to realize, what am I afraid of? That I don't have the ability to do this? I do it. Whenever I get backed into a corner, I do it in an improv scene. And additionally, you also start to learn that when you make a mistake, it's either fine, things move on, or sometimes that mistake is the funniest thing of the day. See, another thing that is a big part of improv is that in order to be a good scene partner, you have to really listen to what your scene partner is communicating to you. It's not just about the words that are being said, but it's about the entire energy. Again, you start a scene with someone else and you guys have no idea where this is going, and so your scene partner initiates the scene by going, oh my God, I can't believe it. The whole building is on fire, right? And he says it with this emotion, so you gotta pay attention to that emotion. You really have to listen with more than just your ears. You have to listen with your whole self. You have to listen with your emotions. In improv, we call that gift giving, and you have to look out for gifts. So there are gifts that are given to you as a person, as a scene partner, which you could miss if you're all up in your head, if you're not really focusing on the other person, if you're not seeing them as somebody who is capable of giving you gifts. You start to get trained in listening in a much more emotional way. And how many people have been told that they're not really listening to other people in their lives? How many couples have struggled with that, really truly listening to each other? What improv starts to do is it starts to train you to listen to the entire communication of the other person. And sometimes we'll do scenes where there's no words being said, and that's a great exercise in what's being communicated to me. Like, am I really truly listening and hearing what the gifts that are being given to me by my scene partner? So it adds another layer of improving relationships, improving intimacy. See, and then there's this other thing that people will say when they hear improv is, I'm not quick enough, I'm not witty enough. It's really not true, because improv is not really about being funny. Maybe where you could make a great joke if you're witty like that. But the truth is, improv is about being present. And the reason why improv is not really about being funny is because when you're trying to be funny, you're not listening to your scene partner. And when you're not listening to your scene partner, the scene doesn't work. Jokes, they kind of find you, right? Like the jokes, the funny moments find you, but the scene has to be solid. Like, you can't leave your partner out to dry because you have a funny joke and you didn't listen to what they said, and then you said a joke. Maybe you got a laugh, but it's not going to be a great scene. And you're going to see that. You'll see that. Sometimes people come into improv and they're very, very funny. And they quickly learn that being funny doesn't mean you're a good improviser. What being funny is a tool that you can use while you're improvising, but you gotta let go of that stuff. You gotta make it your number one priority to listen to your scene partner, find the gifts that they're giving to you, add to those gifts with giving gifts back. And then the funny kind of happens at a certain point. When people say, I'm not witty or I'm not quick enough for improv, I encourage them to try it, because some of the funniest moments that I've seen in improv happened from people who consider themselves not funny and not witty, but they were just so plugged into the moment that their response was perfectly timed and just hit it exactly where it needed to be. Life is funny. Life is funny. We have funny moments in life all of the time. We don't plan those moments, and they're not only available to witty people. How do those moments happen? Well, essentially what we have is we have reality, and then we have these moments where things just kind of line up. They converge in a way which makes us laugh. Essentially what improv is I'm trying to create a reality with my scene partner, and then once the reality is there, then moments will come together. They will converge, and they'll be funny. And this is the reason why Del Close taught not trying to be funny in improv, because he actually had the theory that audiences laugh in improv more out of satisfaction that they solved the problem of the scene and that these two humans synced up, as opposed to that this was hilarious. There are some times where we laugh at things in improv which you would have a hard time telling it over to someone else, explaining to them like what the joke was, but when you were there, it was hysterical. Well, that's because you were there seeing the entire reality form, and you saw the problem of the scene, how these two people got a suggestion from the audience, they didn't know how they were going to handle it, and then a minute and a half later, they were singing a song together that they, made up when they were kids in the scene, in sync with each other. And somehow they know the song that they're trying to sing, even though they're both making it up on the spot. It's kind of magical in a way, and Del Close's theory was people laugh out of satisfaction, of seeing the problem of the scene resolve and seeing the human connection happen. Going back to that whole idea of I'm not witty or I'm not quick enough, really, to me, that's anxiety. That's what that is, because if you're capable of listening and responding and connecting to someone else, you'll be a good improviser. Some of my favorite improvisers are not the ones who are making the quickest, wittiest jokes. Sometimes they're the one that, in the scene, that doesn't say anything and just lifts their eyebrows at the exact right moment. A friend of mine was in a scene where one guy was trying to be cool because he had tattoos. This lady in the scene was trying to get his basic information. She had no patience for his attempts to be cool, and so she goes, yeah, okay, so you have tattoos, well, that's good for you. And it was one of the funniest moments of the day because of how dismissive she was of his big gestures of look at my tattoos, right? That's not a boisterous, loud, witty, extra creative comment. It was just perfectly placed in the reality that these two people were living in during that scene. There's a certain amount of self-consciousness which is healthy, and then a certain amount of it which is not necessary. So we have a system that we develop as we get older to be aware of social consequences. We don't do certain things like we did when we were 2 years old. We won't run around naked because that will affect us negatively. And it makes us uncomfortable, and that discomfort is teaching us something. Ooh, I don't want to do that because that seems like a bad idea. So, but what about times where being uncomfortable is the discomfort is not really giving us any accurate information about the risk that's right in front of us? Improv is a good space where you see self-consciousness. We all have it, and newer improvisers will have more of it. And logically, if you think about it, there's no reason why you should have self-consciousness, because we're all in this together, goofing off, embarrassing ourselves. Who in here is going to judge you, right? No. So in a warm-up exercise in improv, you have to make an animal noise, and it takes time for us to shed that self-consciousness, but a first-time improviser will a lot of times be like, oh, I don't know, cluck, did I do it right? And everyone's like, yeah, what, like you did it right. Like nobody cares. Nobody's criticizing you like that. One of the things that improv does is it teaches you how to override the false self-consciousness, right? It's the self-consciousness that we don't need, that's holding us back from doing things in our life that have no consequences. We could be self-conscious about, let's say you have, a young child, you have a son or a daughter and they want you to play with them, play a game with them. And there are other people around and you're like, I don't know if I want to get on the floor and be a lion with you. Well, why not? If you really think about it, because it's embarrassing. Well, what's embarrassing about it? It's your son, it's your daughter. Everybody knows that you're playing a game with them. That self-consciousness is the kind that doesn't really help us. It actually kind of holds us back in our life in those type of scenarios. Like there is a amount of playfulness that is necessary in our adult lives that we can hold ourselves back from doing, not because there's any real threat there, but because we're just uncomfortable, which implies that there's a threat there, but it's backwards. It's emotional reasoning, right? If I feel discomfort, it must be there's a threat there. Maybe it doesn't actually work in that direction. Maybe I feel discomfort, but it's based on a false assessment of the threat. So one of the things that improv does is it teaches you that there are times in life where you can just be a goofball, and not just can be, but that it's good, right? It's good to be able to let go and play with your daughter, or even like with your spouse or something like that, with your friends, being a little playful, being a little more emotionally expressive, and not holding back because you're afraid of other people judging you.